Brant DXT grain carts have efficient unload speeds, large carrying capacities, unmatched durability, and reliable components that make sure your cart is working when you are. Lead the field with DXT grain carts from Brant. Visit your local Brant dealer for more information.
It's time for the beef market update with Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are we doing?
I'm good. Good to be here.
Okay, Ann. The market on cattle is you and I were texting earlier this week. It is fascinating. What happened with cash prices this week?
Well, this week was kind of steady, but we didn't talk last week. And last week we had a $5 jump in the southern trade in Texas and Kansas. So, to hold markets steady with those levels from last week is just absolutely amazing, especially now where we flipped and we're into the back half of July. So in the South, Texas and Kansas, we traded anywhere from steady to $2 higher, 230 to 231 live. So again, following last week's big move. And then in the North, we continue to see that premium market, 240 live in Nebraska, 376 to 380 delivered dress. So just very strong markets. Every time the market seems to want to falter and back off. And we've still got this big premium still cash over futures that we've been running with all year long, really. So that just continues to be amazing. We're watching this cutout very closely, which is that wholesale price, and it's kind of doing more of the seasonal thing. This week, the choice cutout did lose $11 a hundred. Again, we're coming off some extreme highs. We're still well above where we were last year, but it closed last night at 373, and the select's about $19 a hundred back of that. So, kind of the signals are there that cash could be running out of some steam, especially as these wholesale markets come down. Packer margins are going to go slip back into the red, and they'll likely try to buy cattle cheaper. But we've said that lots over the last few weeks, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
So, pretty crazy.
What about some of the trade issues between the U.S. and Brazil right now? I continue to hear a lot in some of the mainstream news in terms of some of the concerns about Brazilian trim being an important import into the U.S. to do a bit of a backfill on some of the supply.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. August the 1st isn't that far away, so that's kind of the date. That is the date that President Trump has talked about this 50% tariff on Brazil. So why I think we're hearing a lot about it, first of all, in terms of beef into the U.S., Brazil is the second largest market after China. So the U.S. is Brazil's second largest market after China, sorry. And it's about 23% of U.S. beef imports. So, the numbers are fairly substantial. So that's why we're hearing about it. Most of the imports of beef into the U.S. from all countries, other than Canada, would be of lean trim. And that's, of course, to blend off with domestic product to make ground beef, hamburgers, those kinds of things. So that's largely what beef imports are used for. So to the end of May, beef imports from Brazil to the U.S. were double last year's price. And, of course, North American prices have been very strong, both Canada and the U.S., on all cuts, beef, and meats, middle meats, all the rest of it. So it's been a very attractive market for imports. And that's why we're seeing more and more come into Canada and the U.S. So supplies are tight. Supplies of lean trim are tight. Look at our non-fed production, which is our cow and bull production. In Canada, we're running down on both. U.S. is down. So U.S. imports are up 33% to the end of May, and Canada we're up 20% to the end of June. So we've been bringing a lot of product in. So if all of a sudden you're going to throw a 50% tariff on something, we're going to see some changes, whether it's more product come from Australia, Uruguay, New Zealand. So there will be shifts, because at that kind of level, it certainly we'll see some impacts.
Yeah, let's bring it back home. What are some of the price activity here in Canada?
Well, we had a pretty good market, but Canadian feedlots are very current, especially here in Western Canada. So I think they're feeling like they don't really have to sell at steady money, especially with the wide basis we've got. So there were bids this week of $4.95 to $5 delivered dressed. I think feedlots are looking for a little bit more than that. We'll see if there's more trade developed today. but steady to better. And just one kind of point on Ontario as well. We did see a $10 jump in the dress price in Ontario this week, up to $5.30 delivered. So that was good news as well.
Yeah, on the trade front, we were just talking about imports and exports. One of the trade pieces of data we wanted to cover was feeder cattle imports into Canada from the U.S.
Yeah, we haven't talked to it for a bit, and you kind of thinking in a market like this, maybe we aren't bringing as many feeder cattle into Canada as we have been. We've talked about this a lot in the last few years, but in May, we had over 31,000 head of feeder cattle still moving north into Canadian, especially Western Canadian feedlots. Year to date, we're now over 157,000 head. That's up 31%. And our exports in May were only 5,000 head of feeder cattle. So, we're still heavily weighted to the net import position. And again, Shaun, that's just reflecting this tight supply of feeder cattle, U.S., Canada, you name it, and the increasing supply or the increasing pen space capacity that we're seeing as feedlots continue to, especially in Western Canada, do some expansion here and there in terms of overall capacity. So an interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah, talked to lots of different producers at Ag in Motion this week. And, when we talk about the beef sector, I think it's it's not exactly, this isn't a profound statement. There's a lot of risk here right now. It feels like it's high stakes.
It is. Margins have been good, looking in the rearview mirror. And again, that's what's driving a lot of what's going on right now. So it's always moving parts, but again, a very exciting time to be in the business.
Yeah, right now there's a lot of talk about Canada and the U.S. trying to come up with some sort of a trade agreement by August 1st. Now, President Trump has talked about these increased tariffs are on non-USMCA CUSMA goods. But I think there's some concern in the cattle sector, for example, that, if some of this floats into things that are USMCA compliant, boy, the beef industry would have some problems.
Yeah. So things change in a hurry in that kind of case. So yeah, as we've said many, many times, the sooner the better. Some certainty and some knowns around this whole trade negotiations is going to be good because we're running on a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. Talked to a lot of crop producers this week. They're feeling a lot better about the crops, compared to a month ago. Probably same for, we're into middle of July, so the grass is kind of made for the most part. You can tell me otherwise, but we'll take it.
It is, but at the same time, moisture is moisture in terms of what happens going into the fall and next year. So we'll take what's coming right now, and it's been wet for sure. It slows down the haying process, but that's okay. We'll still take the moisture. Yeah.
The other thing that I think has feed yards with a little bit of feeling, I don't know, optimism, whatever, but positive about is the fact there's some softness to the feed grains.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's kind of broad case, whether you're talking about in the U.S. or in Canada, but we are looking at lower levels or the expectations of lower price levels as we head into new crop this fall and winter for feeding these calves, these expensive calves.
Yeah. What about the exchange rate?
Well, just watching that, just seems to want to bounce around that 73-cent area, both sides. Every time you feel like there's some more strength coming, then you get some news that it, some kind of trade actions happen somewhere that it backs off again. So, but just it's hanging around 73. Folks are still thinking, many are still thinking some more strength to it, but it hasn't, changed a whole bunch in the first quarter or the first half of this year.
Well, Anna, it was great to see you last week at the Calgary Stampede. It was great to catch up with yourself and Barry. Have yourself a great weekend.
Great. You too. Thanks, Shaun.